Hello everybody, and welcome to Theology 101. Today I'm going to talk about the Abrahamic Covenant. This covenant reflects God's blessings for his people. I want to start by painting a picture of the context for this covenant. By this point in the Bible, the flood has come and wiped out humanity, leaving Noah and his family. From Noah's 3 sons, we see all the different nations begin to form in Genesis chapter 10. Then we see how God formed these nations in Genesis chapter 11. Even though mankind tried to congregate together as an act of rebellion against God, God intervened and caused them to fill the earth, as he commanded Adam and Noah before, so that he can create a diversity of nations. And from all the different nations in the world, the camera zooms in on one person, Abram. And from Abram, the story is now focused on one nation, God's nation, namely Israel. The way the story of Abram begins is with God's command for him to leave his homeland to go to a new land. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you." With this command, God gives 3 different blessings with a covenant or promise. The first blessing is a promised land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. Later, God gives specific dimensions of this land and adds that Abraham and his descendants will have this land forever. "And I will give to you and to your offsprings after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God." We see this promise repeated to Jacob, thus revealing that this specific land was one way God assures Abraham that his future descendants will become a nation. Why do I say that? One of the difference between a tribe and a nation is possessing a homeland. So this blessing assures Abraham that God will not only give Abraham a new land, but will turn his descendants into a great nation. This leads to the second blessing, namely descendants. God said this to Abraham, "And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing." This is the backdrop of the entire book of Genesis from this point forward. It records the Genesis, or the beginnings, of Israel as a nation. We see that Abraham has a son named Isaac. Then Isaac has a son named Jacob. Later, Jacob's name gets changed to Israel, which means fighter of God, because he wrestled all night with God. Jacob then has 12 sons, and these 12 sons become the 12 tribes of Israel. So as this narrative unfolds, we see that God's promise to Abraham is also being fulfilled. His descendants do become a great nation called Israel, and they are distinguished from all the other nations of the world as God's chosen nation. Now, the sign of the Abrahamic Covenant also shows how Israel separated themselves from other nations. What is this sign? We see God tell Abraham what the sign of this covenant is. "You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins, and this shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you." Why would God choose circumcision to be the sign of his covenant? The phrase "to make a covenant" is literally to cut a covenant. This refers to the way people during that time made a covenant with one another. Typically, they would cut an animal in half and then walk through the 2 pieces to signify that they are bound by this covenant through the animal's blood. By walking through these pieces, both parties are saying that they will uphold the conditions of the covenant. But there is something interesting with how God cut a covenant with Abraham. After Abraham cut an animal and set the pieces on each side of him, he fell asleep at night. Then we see what happens. When the sun had gone down and it was dark, behold, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. Do you notice something missing? God walked through the 2 pieces, but Abraham never did. In other words, this covenant is an unconditional covenant, meaning that God will uphold this covenant regardless of what Abraham does. This explains why God never abandoned Abraham or his descendants, Israel, even when they sinned or worshiped idols. In fact, years later, God reminds Israel that he has remained faithful to them because of this covenant made with Abraham. "It was not because you were more in number than any other people that the Lord set his love on you and chose you, for you were the fewest of all peoples. But it is because the Lord loves you and is keeping the oath that he swore to your fathers, that the Lord has brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the house of slavery, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Know therefore that the Lord your God is God, the faithful God who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations. Also, Israel prided themselves as those who were circumcised as opposed to other nations, like the Philistines, who were uncircumcised, because of the visual reminder that God cut an unconditional covenant with them. The third and final blessing is that Abraham will be a blessing for all nations. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. The phrase in you is better understood as through you. In other words, through Abraham, all the families or nations of the world will be blessed. So the purpose of Israel was to be a light to the nations to draw them to God. The problem was that Israel did a poor job of reflecting God to the nations, that not many came to him. We do see a few examples of Gentiles, meaning non-Jewish individuals, who came to Yahweh, such as Rahab and Ruth. But we don't see nations coming to Yahweh through Israel. So how is this blessing going to be fulfilled? Good question. After Jesus' death and resurrection, the Apostle Paul explains how the Abrahamic Covenant gets applied to Gentiles through Christ. Know then that it is those of faith who are the sons of Abraham. And the scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, preached the gospel beforehand to Abraham, saying, "In you shall all the nations be blessed." So then, those who are of faith are blessed along with Abraham, the man of faith. The Apostle Paul is not saying that Gentiles or the church have become the new Israel. Later, Paul writes that the physical blessings from the Abrahamic covenant, such as land, are irrevocable, meaning that they still apply for national Israel. One day, all Israel will be saved according to Paul. And when this happens, then they will experience the first two blessings of the Abrahamic covenant. However, Paul says that in this third blessing of the Abrahamic covenant, we see that God always intended to save Israel and Gentile nations in his kingdom. In other words, God planned that through Abraham, that all the nations of the world will be blessed. But it will not come from Israel, but the King of Israel, namely Jesus. Through Jesus' death and resurrection, we see the door open for Gentiles to receive the spiritual blessings of this covenant. In fact, a picture of God's kingdom shows us that indeed, through Abraham, all the nations are blessed. And they sing a new song saying, "Worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. And you have made them a kingdom and priests to our God, and they shall reign on the earth." God blesses the nations through Abraham because Jesus is the seed of Abraham, who came to bring salvation to all nations of the world through his blood. Thank you to today's sponsor, Awe and Reverence. They offer a free digital worship music app called Maskill. If you want to find out more, I'll leave some links below in the description box. If you missed the last video about the Noahic covenant, I'll leave a link here for you to watch. Until next time, see you.